December 24, 1944. Camp Duboce, Wyoming. The snow lay 3 feet deep, sealing the camp in white silence. German prisoners huddled in their barracks, expecting another night of thin soup and stale bread. At 1800 hours, the mess hall doors opened. The guards stood ready, rifles slung but unused. Lieutenant Harold Harlem stepped forward, his voice steady yet warm. "Tonight," he announced, "we serve turkey dinner, with all the trimmings." Imagine the disbelief. Men who 3 months earlier had fought in the Ardennes now smelled roasted turkey, gravy, and cornbread. Soldiers who had braced for humiliation instead found long tables set with care. At the head sat German officers, honored as guests, carving meat beside American mess sergeants. For one night, the rules of war dissolved. This story is not only about food. It is about 425,000 prisoners scattered across America, men who discovered that captivity could be more humane than freedom in a collapsing Reich. It is about diaries filled with wonder, about orchestras and Christmas carols rising from behind barbed wire, about farmers who opened their homes to former enemies. Stay with us, because this is not just another story of World War II. It is a story of humanity found in the unlikeliest of places and of the quiet acts that shaped a new world when the guns finally fell silent. The winter of 1944 pressed heavily upon the Rocky Mountains. In Europe, cities crumbled under Allied bombs, families shivered in basements with little food, and the German Reich staggered on its last legs. Yet across the ocean, on American soil, a different world awaited the men captured from Hitler's armies. By December, 425,871 Axis prisoners were held across the United States. They were not confined in a handful of massive camps, but scattered in a vast network. 155 base camps and 511 branch camps stretched from Maine to California. Only Vermont, North Dakota, and Nevada held none. The numbers were staggering, yet numbers alone did not tell the story. What mattered were the moments when law, culture, and humanity collided in ways no soldier could have imagined. At Camp Duboce, Wyoming, the German diary of Rudolf Rachel recorded the shock of that Christmas Eve. Captured at St. Vyeth during the Battle of the Bulge, he expected punishment and starvation. Instead, he wrote, "We celebrated together quite according to German custom." The men on both sides were deeply impressed by the entertainment presentations. Prisoners had prepared a program of music and jokes. Americans responded by serving turkey, gravy, and vegetables. In a place where bitterness should have reigned, laughter filled the air. The contrast with the Eastern Front could not have been sharper. In Soviet camps, German prisoners often faced brutal conditions, little food, and no certainty of survival. In America, the Geneva Convention was not merely upheld but exceeded. Guards supervised, but German non-commissioned officers maintained discipline. Roll call was led by German sergeants, evening formations by German captains. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison at Camp Glay, Colorado, explained it plainly. "You remain soldiers. You maintain your military structure. We provide security and ensure treaty compliance. How you organize your daily life remains your responsibility." Such a policy produced surprising results. At Camp Glay, captured officers turned barracks into classrooms, former professors taught mathematics, engineers held seminars, prisoners who had been immersed in propaganda now found books once banned in their homeland. German youths studied English. Camp libraries stocked volumes from Shakespeare to Thomas Mann. Knowledge, once forbidden, was now freely shared. The food itself told another story. In 1944, American mess halls served 3 hot meals each day. Breakfast might include scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh orange juice. Pancakes with maple syrup, items long vanished from German tables, reappeared here in abundance. German prisoners wrote home through censored Red Cross letters, describing meals their families could scarcely imagine. Many gained weight in captivity, a cruel irony when compared with hungry relatives back home. One prisoner, Private Wilhelm Schaefer of the 21st Panzer Division, bit into a piece of turkey that Christmas and realized that he was healthier as a captive than as a soldier of the Reich. Such moments pierced the myth of superiority that Nazi propaganda had drilled into young men for years. Across the camps, the atmosphere was guarded but often relaxed. Watchtowers stood at a distance, fences were modest, and rifles were carried with little show of force. Escape attempts occurred, but rarely succeeded. In fact, less than 1% of prisoners tried. Most who escaped returned voluntarily, cold and hungry, preferring the warmth and food of American captivity to life on the run in unfamiliar lands. By Christmas 1944, the world knew the war's direction. Soviet armies pressed against Germany's borders. Allied divisions surged through France toward the Rhine. Yet within American camps, the war's harshness softened. Here, thousands of men who had once fought with zeal now confronted a gentler reality, one that challenged everything they had believed about enemies and war itself. This was the arithmetic of captivity in America. 400,000 prisoners fed, clothed, and organized with consistency that astonished even German officers. Veterans of Wehrmacht logistics, long considered among the best in the world, watched in disbelief as American quartermasters delivered fresh food, medical supplies, and mail across a continent. The efficiency of the system revealed a power not of ideology, but of industry and organization. The stage was set for something larger than survival. For many German prisoners, these camps became laboratories of reflection, where questions about democracy, justice, and humanity quietly took root. And it all began with small gestures, like turkey on a snowy night in Wyoming. The first true shock for many came not from kindness, but from food. By autumn 1944, Camp Glay in Colorado processed thousands of new arrivals. Captain Gard Marr, a former artillery officer captured during the Soviet summer offensive, braced for starvation. Instead, on his first morning, he was handed scrambled eggs, bacon, toast with butter, and a glass of fresh orange juice. Pancakes arrived, dripping with maple syrup. It was a feast that German civilians had not seen since 1942. In his memoir, he wrote that the abundance alone was enough to make men doubt what they had been told about America's weakness. Meals were only the beginning. Work programs soon integrated German prisoners into the very economy that fueled America's war. The sugar beet harvest of Colorado needed 30,000 laborers. Sons of farmers were overseas, fighting in Europe and the Pacific. German prisoners filled the gap. Among them was Otto Brenner, once a panzer driver at Falaise. Now he found himself driving a John Deere tractor, its hydraulics and precision far beyond anything he had seen in German equipment. For his labor, he received 80 cents a day, wages he could spend at the camp canteen on cigarettes, beer, or magazines. Yet the deeper transformation came from human contact. In South Carolina, farmer Cecil Camel hired 3 former Wehrmacht soldiers to help on his family farm. They built barns, harvested tobacco, and mended fences. At Christmas, Camel's mother set an extra table and invited them to share the family feast. Turkey with dressing, sweet potatoes, green beans, cornbread, and apple pie. The men sang carols around the piano, blending German hymns with American tunes. Cecil, only 12 years old at the time, remembered decades later how the night erased the line between enemy and guest. The pattern repeated across the country. In Nebraska, farm families invited German workers into their homes. Kurt Reichman, a former radio operator, wrote in his diary of a Christmas Eve spent with the Anderson family near Hastings. The children proudly displayed their presents. The grandmother asked about his family in Bavaria. They sang together in German and English. They treated us like family members rather than enemy prisoners, Reichman recorded. In Tennessee, Camp Crossville housed some of the most prestigious German officers, over 1,500 men, many decorated with the Knight's Cross. General Bernhard Ramke, Colonel Friedrich von der Heydte, veterans of Africa and Europe, found themselves in neat barracks with recreational halls. Gerhard Hennis, once a captain in the Africa Corps, expected harsh interrogation. Instead, he received his uniform back, insignia intact, his personal items returned. His first meal stunned him: roast beef, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, milk, and coffee. Later, he wrote that never since 1939 had he eaten so well. The camp canteen sold Coca-Cola and ice cream, luxuries. Unknown in wartime Germany. These experiences carried a powerful psychological weight. Soldiers trained to view Americans as decadent and weak discovered a society both abundant and disciplined. They saw supply chains that delivered fresh vegetables to remote camps, medical clinics with modern equipment, and an industrial system that never faltered. For men raised to believe in German superiority, the revelation was disorienting. Even music became a battlefield of ideas. Camps hosted orchestras and choirs. At Camp Campbell, Kentucky, 2 full ensembles performed. One played Bach, Beethoven, and Mozart for audiences of Americans and Germans alike. Another played swing and dance tunes, blurring cultural lines. Camp newspapers published essays on philosophy and democracy, topics banned under Nazi rule but encouraged by American administrators. Not all accepted these lessons. Hardcore Nazi supporters remained defiant, prompting segregation into special camps like Tonkawa, Oklahoma. But most prisoners fell between extremes. Men like Friedrich Weber, captured at Monte Cassino, had fought dutifully without devotion to ideology. By Christmas 1944, Weber attended English classes, read American newspapers, and concluded that Germany's future could not return to fascism. The tension of these revelations formed the true climax of captivity. Men who once marched under the swastika now sang Christmas carols beside American families. Farmers shook hands with the same soldiers who had bombarded their sons in France. Guards who once aimed rifles across battlefields now served food across wooden tables. And the question hung in the frosty air. If enemies could share bread in Wyoming, could nations one day share peace? Work was more than survival. It became revelation. Heinrich Zimmermann, once a tank commander in Normandy, now labored in a munitions plant near Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Each day he inspected artillery shells, bound for the very front where his comrades still fought. His supervisors were American women whose husbands and brothers served overseas. The irony struck him with every shift, yet what surprised him more was the respect. They treated him as a worker, not as an enemy. In censored letters home, he described safety regulations, rest breaks, and wages that far exceeded what German industry offered its own laborers. His family could hardly believe such conditions existed. Agricultural work revealed similar truths. Werner Hoffman, an artillery observer captured in the Ardennes, found himself on sugar beet farms near Scottsbluff, Nebraska. The equipment dazzled him: John Deere harvesters, international trucks, Caterpillar tractors. Productivity levels explained how America could feed its people while supplying armies across oceans. Hoffman earned enough to buy clothing, books, and small luxuries. His experience made clear that even in wartime, American civilians enjoyed prosperity absent from German life since the late 1930s. For many, the most unforgettable memories came not from machinery, but from human warmth. In Nebraska, the Johnson family invited prisoners to share Christmas Eve dinner. They cooked sauerbraten, red cabbage, and potato dumplings, dishes the Germans had described to them. Across the table, laughter flowed and carols blended languages. For men separated from their families by oceans and ideology, such evenings restored something they thought lost forever: dignity. Medical care deepened the paradox. At Camp Florence, Arizona, hospitals were equipped with surgical theaters, X-ray machines, and modern drugs. Major Robert Muller, once a surgeon in the Africa Corps, now operated on both German prisoners and American soldiers. In the operating room, enemy lines dissolved. Wounded men received the same anesthesia, the same stitches, the same chance to live. Camp doctors even addressed psychological wounds. Depression, anxiety, and combat stress were treated with counseling sessions, group therapy, and occupational programs. Few armies in that era gave such care even to their own troops. The effects rippled beyond the camps. German officers, long schooled in strict hierarchy, marveled at the efficiency of American logistics. Quartermasters delivered fresh produce to isolated compounds week after week. Communications linked remote outposts to national command structures. Even the relaxed security stunned them. Watchtowers stood far apart. Guards carried rifles loosely. Many camps allowed trusted prisoners to work unsupervised beyond the fences. Escape attempts were rare, and most who tried returned within days, cold and hungry, preferring warm meals to freedom without shelter. By Christmas 1944, word of these conditions traveled across the prisoner network. Rumors circulated. Some men gained weight in captivity, others learned English. Still others read books once burned by Nazi officials. The contrast with letters from home, full of rationing, bombings, and despair, could not be ignored. Slowly, loyalties shifted. Not all abandoned their ideology, but many began to doubt. Could a nation so prosperous, so organized, truly be the decadent enemy described by Joseph Goebbels? Cultural exchanges turned camps into unlikely laboratories of democracy. The YMCA provided violins, accordions, and drums. Orchestras played Bach and Beethoven for mixed audiences of prisoners, guards, and even local civilians. Camp newspapers published essays on politics, philosophy, and constitutional law. Younger prisoners, especially students drafted into the Wehrmacht, proved most receptive. They discussed individual rights, freedom of the press, and the structures of democracy, concepts silenced for a decade in their homeland. The War Department's Special Projects Division encouraged this re-education carefully. Books once forbidden in Germany lined camp shelves. Films depicted American industry and culture. Lectures introduced constitutional principles. Participation was voluntary, but interest grew as men realized the war was lost. For many, these lessons planted seeds that would shape post-war Germany. Relationships formed that endured long after the armistice. Some prisoners exchanged letters with American farm families. Others returned decades later to visit the homes where they had once worked as captives. Out of forced labor came friendships. Out of captivity came memory. The Christmas season of 1944 thus marked more than temporary comfort. It was the turning point when thousands of German soldiers realized that the world they had been taught to despise might hold answers for their future. In barbed wire camps under snowy skies, democracy whispered its first lessons to men raised in dictatorship. The irony could not have been greater. The prisoners of America left captivity better fed, better educated, and in many cases more hopeful than they had been as free men under the Nazi banner. The Christmas of 1944 did not end the war, but it changed the men who lived through it. Behind barbed wire in Wyoming, Colorado, Tennessee, and countless other camps, German prisoners discovered that captivity in America carried an unexpected gift: dignity. They ate turkey carved by men who once fought them in forests. They worked fields beside families who welcomed them at Christmas tables. They studied books their leaders had banned, and they healed wounds, both physical and unseen, under the care of American doctors. These experiences did not erase the horrors of battle. Cities in Europe still burned. Families still starved, yet within the quiet routines of captivity, thousands of soldiers began to doubt the lies that had driven them into war. Some found hope in the possibility of a different Germany, one built not on fear and cruelty, but on freedom and law. The irony remains striking. While the Reich collapsed in ruin, its soldiers gained weight in American camps, learned languages, and discovered democracy. The simple act of sharing food and respect undermined years of propaganda more effectively than any bullet. In this way, the truest battlefield of World War II was not only in Normandy or the Ardennes. It was in the minds of prisoners who realized that the future belonged not to tyranny, but to humanity. As we look back, the lesson is clear. Even in the darkest winters, compassion can pierce through the snow. Even among enemies, music and bread can build bridges stronger than barbed wire. And even in World War II, a conflict that scarred continents, the spark of peace could still be kindled in a mess hall on Christmas night. If this story stirs your heart, remember that history is not only written in battles, it is written in gestures of mercy, in choices of justice, and in the courage to treat an enemy as human. That is the legacy of World War II, and it is a legacy we must carry forward.